Welcome to The Explainer. Step inside our university laboratory. This is where we get to unravel the absolute mechanics of the human mind. Today, we're going to explore the invisible forces that shape our everyday routines. We're diving deep into the science of habit formation, specifically looking through the lens of one of psychology's most intriguing historical perspectives, Edwin Guthrie and his contiguity theory. Let's get right into it.
To really wrap our heads around this theory, let's look at a habit I'm sure we're all familiar with. Picture our student here. She is deep in focus, studying hard at her desk. Then, suddenly, a phone notification appears. Just a quick ping, a little flash of light. And immediately, literally without a second thought, her hand reaches out and she picks it up. We see this play out constantly, right? The sound happens, the hand reaches. It's totally automatic. So watching this perfectly synchronized little habit, we have to ask ourselves, did she actually need a reward every single time to learn this specific response? Or is there something else going on? Did the situation itself, the desk, the studying, the ping, did it just become completely hardwired to that physical response of picking up the phone? Well, Edwin Guthrie, who was a massive pioneer in behavioral psychology, came up with a really fascinating alternative to the traditional reward-based learning theories of his time. Okay, let's dive into this. Guthrie proposed what we now call contiguity theory, and the central idea here is just beautifully simple. Learning occurs when a stimulus and a response occur together closely enough in time. That's it. He argued that when a specific combination of stimuli happens alongside a movement, well, the next time those stimuli pop up, they'll tend to be followed by that exact same movement. The association is formed simply because they happened together. This brilliantly illustrates a really unique perspective Guthrie had on human action. He heavily emphasized specific sensory motor patterns. So according to Guthrie, what we actually learn are highly specific physical movements, not just broad, vague behaviors. Think back to our student. When she hears that ping, she isn't learning some broad concept of distraction. No, she's learned the precise, exact physical movement of extending her arm and grasping that device in that specific context. Now, keep the number one in mind, because one of Guthrie's most groundbreaking and honestly kind of controversial ideas was one-trial learning. He basically suggested that learning can happen in just a single trial. Boom. When a stimulus and response happen together, that association can be established instantly. For Guthrie, learning was an all-or-none process. Repetition doesn't actually strengthen the connection itself. So you might be wondering, why do we practice things then? Well, Guthrie argued that because every real-world situation is just a tiny bit different, we need repeated experiences to develop a generalized response across all those slight variations. So the absolute crucial point here is temporal proximity. Time is literally everything. An immediate connection creates a stronger stimulus-response association. The closer they occur in time, the tighter that bond is going to be. But if you introduce a delay between them, the connection becomes way less clear, and the learning might be significantly weakened or even prevented altogether. That absolute split-second immediacy is the beating heart of Guthrie's entire theory.
Now this brings us to a massive point of divergence in psychological history. Let's contrast Guthrie's view with reinforcement theories, like the ones championed by Edward Thorndike. Unlike Thorndike, Guthrie didn't think rewards or punishments were the fundamental cause of learning at all. Nope. For Guthrie, the association is formed simply when the stimulus and response happen at the same time. If a reward or a punishment happens, well, it's occurring after the association is already locked in. The reward doesn't forge the bond, the timing does.
And that exact logic leads us directly into a fascinating little concept called postremity. Postremity is simply the tendency to learn the last response you made in a particular situation. Basically, whatever you did last in a certain context is exactly what you're most likely to do the next time you find yourself there. As you can imagine, this has huge implications for the classroom and for habit formation in general. It means the final response a student produces in a learning situation should absolutely always be the correct one, because that last response is what gets glued to the stimulus.
Okay, let's see how this actually plays out in the lab. To prove his theory, Guthrie and his colleague George Horton put together this famous puzzle box experiment. Picture this cinematic setup. They placed cats inside a specialized puzzle box built with clear glass panels. These transparent walls were totally key because they allowed the researchers to just meticulously observe and photograph the cat's exact physical movements as they bumped around trying to trigger the escape mechanism.
And what they saw through that glass was super interesting. The cats consistently tended to repeat the exact sequence of physical movements that they used in their previous successful escape. Basically, improvement happened because irrelevant movements were gradually eliminated from successive associations. Just through trial and error, the cats naturally dropped all the useless flailing and completely honed in on the exact physical sequence that worked a time before.
So that's how we learn them. But what happens when we forget a habit? Well, Guthrie had a really unique take on this too. He didn't think forgetting was just about the passive passage of time, like a memory just fading away. Instead, he argued that forgetting is all about direct interference. An old response is literally overwritten and entirely replaced when a new response becomes associated with that exact same stimulus. The new behavior steps in and directly overrides the old one.
Since habits form when specific situations repeatedly link up with specific responses, like how drinking a cup of coffee might become a stimulus perfectly paired with a smoking response, breaking a habit means you have to actively replace the old response while the same stimulus is present. To do this, Guthrie gave us a brilliantly practical toolkit featuring 3 distinct methods for breaking bad habits. Let's walk through them.
First up, we have the fatigue method. The strategy here is to provide repeated, non-stop opportunities for the old response. You just let the person do the undesirable habit over and over and over again. Eventually, sheer physical or mental fatigue kicks in, which completely prevents the old response from happening. Because they're still facing the original stimulus, but they are just far too tired to perform the old habit, a brand new response inevitably emerges and attaches itself to that original trigger.
Method number 2 is the threshold method. Now, this one is a much more gradual, escalating approach. You start off with a very mild version of the stimulus. Keep it way below the level that would normally trigger the bad habit. Then you just slowly, gradually increase the intensity over time. The goal is to build up tolerance until the full-blown stimulus is present, but without triggering the old response. It's kind of like slowly getting into a freezing cold swimming pool, just inch by inch until it doesn't even bother you anymore.
And the third tool in the kit is the incompatible stimuli method. This one is pretty straightforward. You place the person in a situation where the undesirable response simply cannot be performed. It's impossible. By completely blocking the old habit, you essentially create a vacuum, and that forces a totally different response to happen, which then allows that new behavior to link up with the original stimulus.
All right, let's bring this toolkit right back to reality and check in on our student from the beginning. She obviously has a super strong stimulus-response connection between studying at her desk and checking her phone. To break this, we can easily apply Guthrie's methods. By entirely changing her study environment, say moving her to a quiet library where phones are strictly banned, or just leaving the phone in another room, she simply cannot perform the undesirable habit. Altering this triggering stimuli helps her establish a completely new, far more productive association with studying.
Now, as brilliant and practical as Guthrie's toolkit actually is, modern psychology definitely acknowledges its limitations. While contiguity theory does an amazing job explaining immediate stimulus-response relationships, specific habit formation, and how to break those habits, it does struggle in a few other areas. Critics rightly point out that you can't explain all of learning just through timing. Guthrie's theory largely ignores the massive roles of motivation, cognitive strategies, complex reasoning, and problem-solving. Plus, it gives surprisingly little weight to the profound impact of reinforcement, which we know is huge. To really understand where Guthrie sits in the grand scheme of things, we have to zoom out and look at the broader historical landscape of learning theories. In Era 1, you had Thorndike, who emphasized the consequences of our actions. In Era 2, Pavlov put the spotlight on associations between different stimuli. And then in Era 3, Guthrie shifted the attention squarely onto the immediate, split-second connection between a stimulus and a physical response. And honestly, his focus on immediate contiguity is still incredibly relevant today in areas like behavioral training, advertising, and personal habit change. But as modern learning theories continued to evolve, they really needed to supplement Guthrie's approach with broader explanations involving cognition and especially reinforcement. Guthrie told us that when a stimulus and a response happen together, they connect. But that leaves us with a huge lingering question. What happens when the behavior itself produces consequences that determine whether it'll ever happen again? What actually happens when consequences are deliberately used to systematically strengthen or weaken a behavior? Well, that provocative question is going to be the foundation for our next explainer on B.F. Skinner and operant conditioning. Until then, keep analyzing those habits.